Verghese here. We're going to spend some time talking about mild cognitive impairment, or as you'll probably hear us refer to as MCI. We'll just go over how people should maybe start thinking forward and start preparing for something like this. So let's first start off with defining what is mild cognitive impairment.
Mild cognitive impairment is kind of a boundary concept between normal aging and Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's disease, you have clear-cut short-term memory impairment, where if I gave you 3 words to remember, you wouldn't remember it after 5 minutes. In mild cognitive impairment, people just are not as sharp as they used to be.
So why is MCI important? Why should the public be aware and educated about it?
Well, what we know about MCI is that it's kind of a starting point for Alzheimer's. That's the first signs that you get. Just from a numbers perspective, above the age of 65, 1 to 2% of people go on to develop Alzheimer's per year. If you define a group of people with MCI, it's 10 to 15%. So it's over 10 times more. Also, within 5 years, 50% of a group of people defined or diagnosed with MCI will develop Alzheimer's.
So can you say a little bit about what is MCI?
Well, MCI is kind of hard to define because we haven't created the boundaries as of yet. But it's a situation where people are not as good as they used to be. They're much more forgetful. It takes more effort for them to just cope with day-to-day life.
How is that different than, say, me forgetting something or forgetting to do something?
Well, we all have senior moments where you may forget something for a brief period of time, but it comes back to you after some time. What was my friend's name? 5 minutes later you remember it. You don't if you have MCI.
So is MCI an actual disease? Does it have clear definitions?
Well, MCI is becoming more and more of a disease as we understand the illness. Clearly, it is not Alzheimer's disease. It's not yet become Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's disease, you have a clear deterioration of form where you may forget how to cook some certain recipes, or you may not be able to balance your checkbook. You may lose the ability to drive. Some people just can't find words. They lose the ability to speak. So there's a clear loss of function in Alzheimer's. In MCI, people are still able to function for the most part. Once you develop Alzheimer's disease, there is irreparable brain damage that we cannot fix. And today we may have treatments for MCI. In Alzheimer's, there is this toxic protein that builds up in your brain. It's called amyloid. It's little balls of protein that fill in between the cells of your brain. At the MCI stage, we are looking at medicines in the research phase which can prevent that from happening, prevent that protein from being deposited in your brain.
So how likely is it that someone will have MCI, will go along to develop full Alzheimer's?
Well, there's a lot of statistics on that. In 5 years, 50% of people with MCI go on to develop Alzheimer's. Another way of looking at it is above 65, 1 to 2% of people develop Alzheimer's. But if you're looking at a population of folks with MCI, that number goes up to 10 to 15%.
So what is the likelihood that someone who has MCI to develop Alzheimer's?
Well, if you take a population of people above the age of 65, if you have MCI, you're 10 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's than just a regular person with above 65.
So how is MCI actually diagnosed?
At this point, the best way to diagnose it is by doing neuropsychological testing, paper and pencil, like IQ testing. There are certain scales that are out there. There is something called the Peterson criteria and tests like the R bands, repeatable battery for assessment of neuropsychological status, that can be used.
So if I had a grandfather who had Alzheimer's disease, Could I go to my GP and have testing done to help better diagnose?
You mean for mild cognitive impairment?
Yes.
Yeah. At this point, the field has not gotten to the place where it's a commonly available test, like getting your hemoglobin or blood sugar done. But we are moving to that point.
Could I get referred from my GP to a specialist, so to speak?
Certainly a neurologist or a neuropsychologist can do that, or if you come to a research center like ours where we are doing studies for MCI, these things can be assessed.
So what is the main focus of diagnosing and researching MCI in general?
The most important thing about MCI is that it is still pre-Alzheimer's. It's not yet become Alzheimer's. We are evolving ways to diagnose it and evolving ways to treat it so that we can spot it and intervene before it goes into Alzheimer's, which, as I said, is irreparable brain damage. Well, that it's not easily diagnosed at this point, and your average family doctor may not have the tools to do that. And certainly a neurologist or a neuropsychologist or a specialized research center like ours can help to diagnose it. Joe, I don't know if what I said came across well. What do you recall from our conversation?
Well, it sounds like if I develop MCI, I'm 10 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. Another important thing that I took away was that if we find treatments for MCI, we can actually prevent the progression of Alzheimer's disease.